Is Mark willing to volunteer down there for me? You guys have something going on? Yeah, no, I mean, every motion, every second, you just gotta be right on top of it, huh?
Yeah, well, we practiced that.
Yeah, I bet. You call each other.
I can't tell what they're gonna do, so when I hear Ed, I just yell second recognition.
That's right. Happy joke.
Here you go.
Riverside has something going on.
Yeah, all right. Start seeing this.
George, we'll pick up that noise in the lobby, taking some pictures.
And I got some.
If the board could please
Turn their microphones on, we'll get started. Okay, good evening. The hour being 7:15 PM on Monday, April 25th, 2022. I'd like to call to order the Brookfield Village Board Committee of the Whole meeting. Bridget, could we please have a roll call for the committee?
Trustee Ketchmark?
Here.
Trustee Cote?
Here.
Trustee Hendricks?
Here.
Trustee Leclerc?
Here.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Here.
And President Garvey.
Here. Thank you, Bridget. Okay, the first item we have up for discussion is, I promised this was going to be a continuing, ongoing discussion of our economic development plan. Specifically, we're going to address some recommendations about the Economic Development Commission. Tim, did you want to take a bit of a lead here? And
Sure. Thank you, President Garvey. Exactly how you kicked us off. We've had now several meetings in the past couple months where we have discussed, staff and Cindy Klima, our economic development coordinators here, is the main architect and author of a proposed plan to focus our energies and to try to direct our efforts towards an economic development plan. And you know, we throw around the term economic development. It's kind of a broad term. It can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And as we've been talking about this, and I don't want to give the impression that before this group got together or this board got together, that the village has not been conducting economic development efforts, because you have and will always continue to. What we have tried to do throughout this process is recognize what's been done, build on what works, reject or change or alter or modify things that don't work, perhaps things like Visit Oak Park, Brookfield Bucks, more recently, things that we've tried that just haven't taken hold for a variety of reasons, and bearing in mind that some of these initiatives were launched during some of the most troubling times that our economy has ever seen, we've recognized that. So what we're trying to do in this plan is, I think I used the term, it's like up till now, I feel like as a village manager, I've been like shooting at butterflies. Like we try this thing, that doesn't work, we try that thing, and that doesn't work. What this plan tries to do is synthesize and direct and focus our efforts. And when I say our, I mean not only staff, the village board, the community's efforts to try to all be rowing in the same direction and moving towards a direction that's unified. When the board had its strategic planning session a couple of years ago, economic development was a key prime area of focus that you all said you wanted staff to be in tune with. And so this is kind of an outflow of that. While the presentation up till tonight is really focused on the broad plan, and we can talk about the broad plan, at a committee of the whole meeting last month, there were specific questions and requests for follow-up information on one of the recommendations in the plan, which is the potential creation of an economic development commission. And so Emily is going to lead us through a discussion and summarize what this could be. Cindy's here as well to lend her input. And of course, I'm always here to lend input as well and to provide any answers to questions that may come up.
thank you, Tim. And Emily, before I get started, Cindy, thank you. This is, we've talked about this a couple times, and I think this is the first time you've actually been able to join us since the initial plan. But the board, we were very impressed with the plan and the draft and the amount of work that went into it. And we felt to give it proper time. We didn't want to rush through it. We wanted to give each recommendation in each step some additional time and to try and really do this right. But I didn't want it to pass without saying thank you for your work so far. And it was evident, I think everyone commented on how much legwork had to go into the initial plan that you and Emily brought forward, so thank you very much. Thank you. Emily, would you like to?
Absolutely, thank you. What you see up on the screen right now is just a few highlights that the Committee of the Whole memo describes. So going one by one, the proposed Economic Development Commission would have a staff liaison. We're proposing at this moment that would be the person in my position, the Director of Community Development. But there would be, we anticipate, significant support from whoever is in a position currently. Cindy's kind of operating as a economic development coordinator, business support person, but that position is to be discussed at a later date for a later Committee of the Whole item. The commission would be subject to Open Meetings Act, so all of the requirements that you do for a board meeting or the Planning and Zoning Commission meetings, agendas, notices, that would all be followed and adhered to. And then this is something, as Tim mentioned earlier, this would really build on the initiatives that the village has taken in terms of economic development, build on that momentum. And then this commission would also be an organization that would report back on the implementation of the economic development plan. So really holding that plan, as a document that is actionable and holding all of the stakeholders responsible to continue to implement it. This would be something that would be separate than the Planning and Zoning Commission. When we were talking about this, there was a lot of questions about the different roles in terms of land use regulation and zoning items of review. So this really is a commission that's completely separate from that. Similar to how the village planner position is really outside of a lot of the economic development initiatives that we are proposing in the plan. And this commission, it would meet at regular intervals, regularly scheduled and published meetings would be available to the public. And most likely it would be, we're assuming, on a monthly basis to get it going. And it would be at a time when it's appropriate and convenient for business professionals to join. Right now, staff is recommending 9 commissioners. And this is something where each of the commissioners would come from a different sector. We're proposing that the commissioners are either the owner of a Brookfield business or senior management of a Brookfield business. And you can see the list here, run through that list of the various sectors that would be involved. We're recommending 2 commissioners are from a retail establishment, and then you can see the other areas. And this is really very similar to the table that's in your Committee of the Whole memo. I apologize, there's one typo in that memo. Countryside does not have 6 members because they do not have a commission.
Wait, you mean Westchester?
Countryside, in the memo it says that Countryside has 6 members. So that table offers a little bit more clarity. This table does not show the ordinances and the draft agendas that the other communities have. You can take a look at those links in the Committee of the Whole memo. That offers a little bit more detail on how the agendas would be structured and how the ordinances, the enabling ordinances, would be drafted. So I do want to make it clear, if the village board wants to move forward with this key recommendation within the economic development plan, this would not be the last time the board would see this item. There would have to be a text amendment. There would be a lot more discussion and more detail before an economic development commission would be created. This is really just an item to spur discussion and questions from the village board.
Thank you very much, Emily. Appreciate the presentation and the materials in the packet. Does the board have any questions or comments at this point?
So could you talk a little bit about how you would see the commission operating? So who sets the agenda, who decides what tasks are handled? I mean, what is the role of the economic development person?
So I would propose the agendas are prepared similar to how the village planner is the staff liaison to the Planning and Zoning Commission. The person in my role, the Director of Community Development, would largely prepare agendas with, and prepare minutes with the assistance from whoever is in economic development position.
And I could add to that. I think it would be fairly organic. Some of the things would come from us. For instance, if we were looking at a marketing or a branding consultant, rather than start that discussion here, perhaps we would start it at the EDC. Use them as like a brainstorming session, and kind of staff could bounce ideas off of them. But most importantly, you know, these areas of expertise, we'd be trying to tap into the expertise of them. And they'd come to us with ideas and say, oh, well, you know, that's a good idea, but maybe not a great idea. So as things come up, for instance, as PIP requests come in, this would be a logical first place for that kind of discussion to take place, where the business owner would come and perhaps we'd modify our practices and they'd apply. The first step after staff reviewed the property improvement program application, send them to the EDC and let the EDC kind of maybe expand on their project or change it or alter it, depending on what they feel. So depending on what is going on at any given moment in time, it would be, staff would be perhaps going to them, looking for ideas that we have, and conversely, depending on the discussion in EDC, you hope that ideas will bubble up from them to us to say, hey, village, why don't you try doing this, or why don't you try doing that? So it would be a fairly organic process. Some things would be kind of set in stone, like PIP requests, or if we had a economic incentive request for a new development that comes forward. This would be kind of like the Planning Commission right now is the public hearing body for planning and zoning issues. I would view that the EDC would become the kind of first step of it's not a formal public hearing from a legal sense, but it'd be a public discussion about, let's say so-and-so is asking for some type of incentive from the village. Air it out with our business professionals and really kind of root out plans and concepts and recommendations, so that you all, the village board, would be getting these recommendations fully vetted through a commission, much like you get plan commission items on a zoning case now.
I think that interaction between, the board or staff and the commission is extremely important. So, the commission isn't off on some tangent, or at the same time, the commission there is, wondering what are we supposed to do and how do we go about it. I think that's very important. Just one other comment, looking at the villages, I don't think it's essential that they be residents. I mean, if it's a business owner who doesn't live in town, I think that's totally acceptable.
Yeah, we talked about that, and in certain towns, that is it doesn't say on this chart, but it is a requirement. I agree, Trustee Ketchmark, that I think you're limiting yourself. The bottom line is, we have a lot of business expertise of people that work and are invested in this town, whether they live here or not. Quite honestly, I don't think is a determiner of how effective they could be as committees.
If you're a business owner or senior management, you're probably spending more time in Brookfield than a lot of
Absolutely.
residents are. So I agree with that. And just to follow up on Trustee Ketchmark's point, like I looked at the sample agenda, which was very helpful from some of the other towns like Western Springs, and there was talk about it seemed like they vetted a TIF incentive request. So that's something that the commission could make a recommendation to the village board about the validity or the benefits of a TIF request, that type of thing?
Yeah, I'll use my experience in Lincolnwood, and I attended every EDC meeting there for 15 years. We started 2 TIFs while I was there, and both of them started at the EDC. I mean, the brainstorming and the strategizing, and it started there. And it was brought to the village board after it had been vetted and discussed and mulled over it.
So the actual creation of the TIFs came out of those?
Well, it still rests in your hands to create it, but the staff in that case, the commission, had a lot of discussion about the merits of doing TIF, doing a business district tax, doing other areas, and I think Emily's had experience in Elmer's doing the same thing. The EDC, as Trustee Ketchmark said, does become a kind of a synergistic, that's the place where you want to kind of root ideas and almost like an incubator of ideas, And then that's where it starts, and you may want to bring in a Kate McKenna, and they can make a presentation to the EDC, but ultimately, the village board's role doesn't change. You're the one that's going to appoint the members of the commission. They're still recommending to you, nothing gets done. They would take probably, I can't remember any final action or final decision that they make, they recommend to you all.
And I mean, obviously, we have the TIF districts that we've created already, and there's nothing to say that they couldn't recommend a TIF district in a new district or some other type of business district to be created. But the fact that we've created TIF districts already, and I mean, the fact that we've adopted specific policies related to those TIFs, I mean, that's something that they would obviously be made aware of what our policies are, and possibly recommend updates or changes to those policies that we adopted in the beginning, because, times change. So I think that's something that, could be on their plate going forward.
Yeah, I don't want to dictate the first couple agendas, but I do think the first couple of agendas would be more of us, staff, informing them. We have a comprehensive plan. We have a TIF policy. Here are the TIFs in the village. They may not even understand what tax increment financing is. We would help explain that. So it's kind of an onboarding process. They would have to be indoctrinated and orientated towards the things that we have in place. And then once that's done, and maybe it takes 2 meetings, I don't know. City's really smart, maybe it takes 1 meeting. And maybe they get up to speed really quick and we can start the.
And maybe, I mean, they'd have a feel for, I mean, maybe, the PIP program, maybe they could recommend some changes or incentives or different ways to go about it that might create more interest or more need or more impact from those projects. When you look up the makeup of the committee, I mean, that program was created with the best of intentions. It hasn't had as many applicants and projects completed yet. We're just getting started on it, but maybe that type of input from that diverse of a group could come up with ideas. And obviously, the Chicago Zoological Society is obviously a key component of it.
You're absolutely right. When you look at the categories, one of the advantages, I think, of doing this is once people in these different areas become aware, one of the challenges is people just don't seem to know about the PIP program. Well, if we explain what this is at several EDC meetings, they go back and they tell 2 friends and they tell 2 friends, and that's how word would get out. Right. And that's what we would hope, at least.
I see the need, I mean, the logic behind a 9-member committee, but as we've seen with other commissions, and, these would be volunteer positions, obviously, sometimes getting a quorum or we'd have to give the flexibility maybe to set meeting times and dates. Granted, they have to be regular meetings and they'd have to establish a regular meeting schedule, but we'd have to be pretty flexible to assure that you're very likely to have a full commission or a clear quorum with the Open Meetings Act, and so they'd be able to meet and conduct business and not miss a month if there's regular monthly meetings because they don't have a quorum, because, there's things, we want to expedite, some of these things. Like if someone applies for the PIP program, creating the layer of sending them to this commission might be very beneficial, but if they don't meet for a month or there's not a meeting scheduled or something happens, it would delay that. So, but I think those are all logistics. But the 9 members, I see why we want 9 members to have that diverse of a group, but we also have to remember these are going to be volunteers and people who, like I spoke about the Parks Foundation earlier, they're already very busy people to begin with, but they tend to know how to get things done, so. Other questions, comments from the board?
I just had a question about the 9 also. Would you need 9 to start? Or I know some commissions, kind of go in flux, or how many would you recommend having to get going and get started versus being able to even?
Well, we talked about it starting with 7, and then I think we kind of said we'd leave 2 at-large positions for you all. We'd come to you with maybe some recommendations of people, but knowing that maybe you have contacts that we don't know about, and so we came up with 7 real easy categories, and then we said, well, let's leave 2 open for the board to see what you came up with. We could start with 5, you could start with 7, we could start with 9, we could start with 11, whatever you want an odd number, obviously, so if you have a contentious vote, you don't have a tie vote if everybody's there, but we could do whatever the board's pleasure is.
Other questions, comments from the board? And obviously, trustee Conroy, I spoke to him this weekend. As I said, he's dealing with a family matter. He had a chance to review this a little bit, but obviously, he's our liaison to the chamber who would play a key role in this. So obviously, having him talk, maybe reach out to the chamber, get some input from there. I know staff has had conversations in general about this going forward, but maybe to get some additional input from there. But is there a, you know, as we talked about when the economic development plan was presented to us, creating a commission was one possible element. It wasn't something that had to be done, and I mean, staff was looking for guidance from the board. Is there a general consensus that the board is in favor of creating a commission of this nature?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I mean, there's a clear consensus there. Now, maybe it's the, you know, fine tuning of it from there in terms of, you know, this again probably will need another committee session, and if we're ready, you know, Tim and myself will work on the agendas, but we should probably committee another, you know, maybe a possible draft, you know, ordinance or items that the board can maybe flesh out, make decisions. Do you want to go this route or this route? How it's set up, you know, terms of office, you know, I think the meeting times have to, I don't know that we necessarily, well, I actually leave it up to staff. How do you find the most productive meeting time? Do you initially create the commission a certain way and then give the commission the chance to collaborate and decide their best meeting times? But I think it's essential that as it progresses, that the meetings are a set regular time so public participation and awareness could happen as opposed to them changing their meeting schedule every month. But I think we have to respect the professionals that are going to be on this. And so I guess what I'm looking for is maybe suggestions on what our next step should be. What should you come back with so we can give you more input about what we want to do next?
I would recommend that the village attorney works with us. We will present to you, we'll work together to maybe the next time we come to you at the committee of the whole, we'll have a draft ordinance. It would be just like the code, how the code treats the planning commission or the park board. We will put it in the same format. We will put out some proposed standards and regulations, working with the village attorney, and then it'll be a draft so we can change it as needed, and if the board is comfortable with it, then perhaps the next village board meeting we put the ordinance up. Relative, what I would recommend is once you've picked the people, then let staff work with whoever let's say it's 9, and find out the dates and how it would meet. I know most EDCs, I think Emily's done some research, most of them meet on a weekday morning because that seems to be the easiest time for business people to do it. But whatever they say, you know, evening or heaven forbid a Saturday, I mean, sorry, Emily, I don't think you're signing up for that, but we'll see. I mean, once people are identified, we'll work with them to find out the best time, and then, you know, working with Adam, I don't think you have to put in the village code the actual date, the actual like second Monday of the month. It would just be at a time, you know, established by resolution per year, and then we'd work on that.
Okay. And everyone agree with that course of action?
Yeah.
Emily, anything else you wanted to add?
Just adding to that, all of this course of action, I absolutely agree with. And keeping in mind the big picture, this is just one recommendation of the economic development plan. And so moving that plan forward, happy to look at any other items or answer any other questions for that plan, but eager to see that move forward as well.
Thank you. Cindy, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, just I'm happy to be a resource for any of this as we get established. I've been involved in several of them, so
Great. Well, we're counting on you. So.
yeah, no, I'm happy to
All right, thank you.
in any way.
Thank you so much, and we will just continue to work our way through this and the recommendations. So thank you very much for all the time already. Okay, the next item we have out for discussion is case number 2202, a text amendment regarding removal of on-site commercial parking requirements for SA1 core mixed use and SA4A general mixed zoning districts. Emily, are you?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, this is a recommendation that staff brought to the village board previously for the village board to consider requesting that the Planning and Zoning Commission hold a public hearing on that. The Planning and Zoning Commission did hold a public hearing, reviewed staff's recommendation to eliminate commercial parking requirements for on-site businesses in just 2 of the zoning districts. Now, this would be something where the residential parking requirements would remain. So it's just looking at commercial parking requirements in the SA1 and SA4A zoning districts. The Planning and Zoning Commission did review staff's recommendation, and they voted 6-1 to concur with staff's recommendation and move that forward to the village board.
Thank you, Emily. And just to clarify, so if there's a mixed-use development that's, commercial on the first floor and residential on the second floor, the residential part still has the parking requirements?
Absolutely.
Okay. Trustee Hendricks, anything you wanted to share from the Planning and Zoning Commission?
Only that the Planning and Zoning Commission spent a lot of time, some very thoughtful and thorough discussion going through this. I think that eventually they did come to the conclusion that it makes sense. It will keep the community walkable in a way that we want it to be walkable. When you've got surface parking in the middle of the block like that, it makes it a lot less of a welcoming space for walkability. We had comments about, there were some concerns that if we had businesses come in that were had a very intense use, like if the theater were ever to open again, or if we were to get a grocery store in our Grand Boulevard district, which is unlikely, but if something like that came in, if it would take too much of the parking, still, I think that the conclusion, again, that was come to was that that would be a great problem to have. If we've got a vibrant district where we're looking for more parking, that's the problem that we want to have. And there are other options, like potentially looking into using valet parking with the village lot, since it's such a big lot, and various other options like that. We have ideas, and there are options. So, like I said, thoughtful discussion. They did agree that this was a good choice.
And I noted that the Planning and Zoning Commission gave the advice for us to, and I think it's something that we're aware of already, the need, to plan for potential, long-term parking solutions going forward as that becomes necessary. But it's very well taken from them, but we appreciate them, as always, vetting this particular issue. Questions or comments from the board?
I agree with the recommendation.
I mean, we've seen this come up when we've approved projects that staff has explained, well, they had to review it because this is, what is in the current standards, but it's kind of not what is standard in the industry and what is needed with commercial parking, the regulations that we have, just because, basically with the space we have, we would have to turn down so many projects without a waiver of our variation from the parking. It just doesn't make sense to have these regulations in place if we're, recommending that we waive the requirements. And it makes sense. I mean, you look at the 37-hour block of Grand, and yes, there's some nights that it's very, very crowded, and parking is challenging, and there's a demand for it, but it is manageable at this point. But to turn down businesses or say you have to provide at this point, I think as we go forward and we have the success that we're planning on, you could see this particular item being a agenda item for the commission that we're also talking about creating. This is something that will be on their agenda going forward, making recommendations about how to deal with that going forward. But it's also, and again, the distinction between the commercial and the residential, if residential development come in, they still do have to deal with the parking requirements and provide the required number of parking spaces, so. Okay. So the next step is to put this up for board approval at the next meeting? Okay. Thank you very much for everyone that worked on this. Okay, the next item is discussion of the Lead Service Replacement Notification Act. Again, this is an item that we've previously discussed we received a mandate from state and federal government about what we have to do going forward with these lead service lines. And, it's I call it another unfunded mandate because that's basically what it is. It's put on us to solve a $40 million plus problem without, specific aid or benefit going forward. But it's the nature of the way the village was designed years ago and the way standards have changed. And as staff has pointed out, is going to point out, we're not the only ones dealing with this. So who's going to take the lead here? Derek?
I told Derek, this meeting is going great so far, so not to waylay it.
All right.
Good luck, Derek.
Should I start with the bridge or? Okay, into the lead water services. So we came here before the board back on March 14th and gave an overview of the new Lead Service Water Replacement Act, the requirements, the notifications, and the impact on the village. And tonight we want to come back at a second meeting, and I prepared a quick little agenda, do a brief summary of the regulatory requirements. I will go over the typical lead water service layout just to make sure when we talk private and public portion, we all are envisioning the same thing. We did reach out to several other villages, and we have a chart where we can compare the village policies. We did do an updated estimate of costs based on the bids that were received as part of the street improvements project that included replacing 1,000 foot of water main and approximately 25 services. We'll go over some of the funding opportunities offered by the IEPA, and we'll talk about our current issues. Once I'll go through those items, then I'll turn it over to Doug, and he's going to review the current water rate, proposed new water rate. We do have a rate comparison with other villages, as we did a year ago when we raised rates. Go over our staff recommendation, then hit questions and discussion. So again, just a brief overview on the summary regulatory requirements. So as of January 1st, no partial lead water service replacement. What's that mean? Anytime we touch a lead water service, anywhere between the water main and the meter, so it could be the resident touching it, the entire portion of that lead water service has to be replaced. Eliminate the lead. And the only option is the public water portion of the water service will always have to be replaced. The private water portion of the water service, if the homeowner says, I don't want to do this for any reason, then we have to obtain a waiver from them. Second requirement is we have to develop a lead water service inventory. It's due to the IEPA by 2024. We're going to be well ahead of schedule. We're replacing all the MTUs. By 12 months from now, we should have 100% of the interior MTUs, the lead services identified. We'll have that in an inventory, and we'll also have our public inventory done by that time. So we should be about a year ahead of schedule on the inventory. And then the biggest is by April 15, 2027, we have to present to the EPA our final lead water service replacement program. By then, we know exactly how many lead water services we're going to have to replace. We need to start right now. We're anticipating 5,500 private portions. We have replaced about 500 as part of our water main projects over the last 20 years. So we have about 5,000 public portions of the water service. Based on that, we need to replace all of those lead water services over a 20-year period beginning in 2027. I did want to just go over this exhibit one more time. It's a little hard to read on the screen, but yeah, Tim, I see it. Please float it with the cursor. That's the water main that Tim's on. And the section of water service from the water main to the valve in the parkway. We have a shut-off valve. It's the box that rises up is called a buffalo box or a B box, if you hear me referring it to a B box. But from the water main to the B box, that is the public portion. In our ordinance, the village is responsible for maintenance or the costs of repairing that. And that's common in all the villages that we surveyed. And then the other portion of the water service is from that shut-off valve in the parkway into the house and eventually going into the water meter. We're referring to that as the private portion of the water service. In our ordinance, the property owner is responsible for costs and maintenance for that section of the water service. I mentioned that we Carl reached out to several municipalities to get an idea of the total number of water services they have. Real critical number for comparison to us is the number of lead water services they have. And in that column to the far right, it says who's responsible. It's who are they going to make responsible for replacing the private portion of the lead water services? And what you'll see is many of them have a question mark, and that means they're at the same place we are. It's under discussion. I think that's the case for the majority of municipalities that are trying to wrap their heads around this and determine how to figure out how to deal with the cost in particular, the private portion of the lead water service. The public portion of the lead water service, those costs are going to be borne by the village and more than likely through the water rate. I want to touch on just a couple of these. So look at a large village. The second one down is Lombard. A lot of these didn't compare well to us, but we wanted to present you with the data. But they have over 15,000 water services, but they only have 371 lead water services. So they're saying that the property owner is going to be responsible for the costs, but I know they happen to have like a program where they're going to subsidize a portion of the costs. And I haven't talked to their public works director, but if that, I would think they're going to reach out to the EPA. As I presented last time, you can apply for up to $4 million a year to replace the lead water services. Based on our current estimate, that's about 570 services you could replace with lead with $4 million. So if they get one $4 million grant, it'd be less than $4 million. They wipe out all of their water services with one grant, and they don't need to raise their water rate. So they're not really comparable to us. The other one I'll point out is Riverside. I've seen it in the landmark. They've been having discussions in the last couple months. They have, 2,100 lead water services, and in their case, the village decided to go ahead and pay for the public portion. And I believe what their strategy is going to be is they're going to try to get as much funding, possibly all of the funding, for the 2,100 lead water services. And you can see the percentage, that's about 2/3 of their village still has lead water services. I'll touch on the second from the bottom, Oak Park, a much larger village than us. They have 12,000 services, yet they estimate they have less water services than us. A lot of knockdowns going on out there, new home improvements that would have been required since 1986. You have to put, lead is no longer allowed, so they probably have a lot more newer homes with lead water services. But even a large village like that has less lead water services, and what does that mean? Less of a financial burden that the lead water service replacement will create. And then we have Brookfield. We have a total of 6,700 total services. We have 5,000 public lead services. That's an estimate. We don't have the final numbers. We have 5,500 services that we're estimating are lead on the private lead services. So we're in a kind of a unique predicament. We have a chart, but really I think we have to chart our own course on this one. We're different than most of these villages up here.
All I'll add is I know the village managers of most of these towns, and as Derek said, we are unfortunately uniquely situated in the fact that, what is it, 90 or 95% we're guessing of our service lines are lead. And nobody else I've talked to, and as Derek said, Oak Park is over twice as big as we are. Lombard is over twice as big as we are. They just, the way those communities were developed and when they were developed, they weren't the magical period that Brookfield was developed, where lead was the staple. That's what builders did. That's what, in a lot of cases, codes required that lead be used. And unfortunately, in this case, Brookfield's housing stock was developed in that time where that was mandated. All of these question marks, as Derek said, these managers and these boards are going through the exact same conversations and the exact same consternation as we are. I expect that these question marks will eventually change very soon to either property owner or the village. Those discussions are ongoing as we speak, so we are not alone in this, but we are unfortunately in this area uniquely situated where the problem and the issue is most severe in Brookfield.
Okay. So we did update the, our estimate of cost based on 2022 bid prices. We received attractive bid prices on the the lead water service replacement. The public portion of the water service came in at approximately $3,000 a service. So based on our 5,000 estimated services, we're estimating $15 million of public water service that'll need to be replaced in the next 20 years. And the the private portion came in actually much less than what we had estimated at about $4,000 a service. So based on that figure and our 5,500 estimated services, the total cost would be $22 million for a total of $37 million. I will say these are order of magnitude estimates. We did want to reflect what the current bid prices are. Over 20 years, of course, prices are going to go up, but this is what, and of course, we anticipate having to take another look at the water rate over the next 20 years. Every year or every few years, we'll want to revisit it. And if we see prices go up, we can take another look at our water rate. The other thing is we may be applying for grant funding, which can obviously bring the total share down. So this is a starting point of $37 million estimated total cost. There are a couple of funding opportunities. They're under the same, the PWSLP, the abbreviation I have up there is for Public Water Supply Loan Program. It's also known as the IEPA Low Interest Loan Program. It's been around for quite some time for capital projects such as water main replacement, elevated tanks, even pump stations and things like that that won't really affect us, but other towns can apply for that. And the requirements are on, actually, and I jumped into the second one. I'm gonna hit number 2 and continue on, but the capital projects like water main replacement, there's no practical limit in the application amount for capital projects. They do include allow a maximum of $400,000 in loan forgiveness that we can apply for lead water service replacement as part of that water main replacement. So we had discussed possibly applying for approximately $5 million in water main replacement, but we'll have some lead water service replacement as part of that project. We would apply for $400,000, the max, in loan forgiveness. The rest is based on a low interest loan at, I think last year's rate was 1.11%. And then I'm going back up to item number 1. I took it out of order, but what's relatively new with the low interest loan is they have a separate category, separate funding for lead service line replacement. And you can apply for up to $4 million per year for just a standalone lead service line replacement project. Keynote item C is if you do get funding for that, it only covers when the work results in 100% lead-free service from the meter out to the water main. So if we applied for that and we had residents come to us and say, well, I don't want my private portion. Let's say we were going to ask them to pay for it and say, I don't want to pay. We can't use that loan forgiveness money for that service. Quick clarification, some of these may be if, let's say, a resident replaced his private portion and we applied for it and wanted to replace our public portion. We can use it on, even though we're only doing, let's say, half or one portion of the service, as long as it results in lead-free service, we can use this loan forgiveness money. Good. Excellent. Okay, put together, I did a little research. There was a question at the last meeting is what kind of funding has the IEPA been offering? This is what I found on their website. They issue a report each year with their grant project. So total funding available in 2021 was $158 million. This is towards the capital projects, not the lead service standalone projects. They have programmed $350 million in 2022, $300 million in 2023, and $250 million in 2024. You can see there's additional funding that's been coming into the IEPA. We anticipate more loan funding to be available. And they did have a set aside for the lead water service replacement. It's $108 million over 3 years. What's that say? Part of us are, if we are going to go for the lead service replacement funding, what's our likelihood of getting it? We don't know for sure. Actually, I put together, they announced their awards for the 2021 application, and it's going to be in here somewhere. There were 14 communities that were awarded funding in the 2021 projects. And a lot of them are larger, Rockford, Joliet, larger counties or communities. And the other ones we're seeing a lot, they're the lower income communities score a little higher on that. So we're seeing some of the I won't go into names, but some of the lower income communities are amongst them. Not too many in our area. And what that tells me, I think a lot of villages are putting their programs together right now. We anticipate during the next funding cycle, there'll probably be more and more people applying for the $4 million in funding. So I mentioned there were 14 of those communities. There are 10 other communities. Again, very similar distribution. Plainfield's one of them. And actually, Galesburg, I don't know how large they are. I think they're way out west, and the rest are all.
So how much was awarded to those 14 communities?
Total?
Yes.
Yeah, $42 million.
And is that reflected in the $108 million over 3 years?
It would come out of that $108 million.
So that $108 million over 3 years started this year, so they're taking $40 million off that already.
108 per year or total 108 over?
108 over 3 years. Averages what I think 36 million a year, not necessarily distributed that way, but an average. And yes, the 42 million. It's part of this funding year program was.
So that means there's about another $60 million available for the next 2 years?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And again, it's hard to anticipate the funding. I think we've seen articles. Chicago has more lead services than any of the other large cities. Illinois has more lead services than any of the other states. We're hopeful that will translate into more funding being available in this region, but we don't know for sure right now. And I'll wrap up my portion with current issues, just to refresh some of the discussion from 6 weeks ago. But we are replacing the water main on 26th Street this year, and the work will include replacing the water service from the water main to the B box. That's the public portion. It's always been our practice is that we replace that portion of the service regardless of material. We put a new service into the B box. The second thing is it needs to either include replacing the service from the B box to the meter, so that on the private portion, or we need to obtain a waiver from the property owner if they do not want to replace their section of the water service. And number two is probably the key that we can get to when we open up for questions and discussion, but the challenge here is we have what we anticipate being able to get some, I'm going to call it loan forgiveness grant funding, but how do we distribute that if we only get enough grant funding for a portion, replacing a portion of the services? Do we pay for 100% of the first X, 1,000 services, and then push the remainder on the residents? That doesn't seem equitable. I see that being the big discussion for the board and the policy direction that they need to set. The other option is maybe if we're going to look at the residents being responsible for their portion, maybe we're not applying for grant funding. because we just have no equitable way of distributing that grant funding, if that's the case. So I'll turn it over to Doug to discuss the impact on the water rates.
So Doug, you're going to tell us how you pay for Derek's wish list.
I'm going to tell you when I'm going to retire. So up here is our current water rate, and I'll remind you that we did raise the water rate effective September 1st. So the component that we raised on September 1st was the capital cost at the bottom there, where that 352 is. The remainder of our water rate consists of 4 other items: the cost of the water, which comes from the Water Commission; the recovery cost, which is basically a loss cost that we get for water that we don't bill out; equipment and maintenance and operation costs, which are basically those items that we use to maintain the water fund. It includes salaries as well as system repairs and maintenance. So right now, your water bill would reflect a total of $13.84 per 1,000 gallons. All right, so what we're looking at doing is over the next couple of years, because we did raise the water rates to do some water main replacements, we are anticipating going out for a $5 million IEPA loan to perform the beginning of the water main replacements.
Can I just, I want to remind the board, because if I'm a board member, I'm saying to myself, well, why didn't we talk about this last year when we talked about adjusting the rates to account for the water main replacements? And just as a recall, and a CYA for us, we did talk about it when we were doing this about a year ago. This whole lead requirement was being bantered about in Springfield. We had no idea what was going to happen, and we talked to other towns. So when we came to the board, as I recall, we did mention that this lead requirement, this $5 million in loans that Doug is talking about, that was good, solid planning on the village's behalf to replace our main issue then was the 100-year-old water mains. That's what we were focused on then. That's why the board, I think properly so, did adjust the water rate. We made mention as we were wrapping up those discussions, and it did become a little bit more apparent that, oh my goodness, this bill in Springfield may actually get adopted, and we may be saddled with this lead service line. Nice timing, Brookfield, on that. I just want to remind the board of that it's not staff's fault, it's not the board's fault. While we were going through this, we were monitoring what was going on in Springfield, but we just had no clarity. And really, I was kind of shocked and surprised that the state, I shouldn't have been, but I was, that they adopted this lead requirement. I mean, you want to talk about an unfunded mandate. Now, they may fund a portion of it if we get $4 million, but this is a really large unfunded mandate that they kind of foisted on us that we wouldn't be as early as a need to make a decision on this if it wasn't for the fact that now that we got 26th Street in the hopper for this year, we do need to come to some type of understanding as to how we're going to treat that. So I feel like, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Doug, but I felt like it's necessary for the board to remember that and for staff to remember that we were aware that this bill was potentially coming down the pike. I really didn't think it would happen that quick, and I really didn't think they'd make it effective as of 2022. You're doing a water main project, you've got to replace that entire lead line. It's kind of a confluence of bad timing, so.
Well, we absolutely did talk about that, because we were talking about like a $2 increase, right? We were like at 11 and change, we went up to 13 and change, and there was a lot of discussion of, do we do it all right now? And at the time, I believe the consensus was, we're probably gonna be back here in a year to 2 years to discuss another rate hike to cover lead service replacement. So it was absolutely talked about and discussed during that time frame. But it does stink, because now we're talking about it at a time when many residents or many people in the United States are having a difficult time financially affording everything else on top of this, whether it be gas prices or whatever it's going to be. And here we are discussing another possible rate hike when everything else is being hiked at the same time. So that part of the timing is devastating for some people.
I agree.
So As part of the water main replacement project, for which we did raise the rates back in September, we will be required to, and even including the 26th Street main replacement, we're going to be required, or the residents going to be required, to pay for the private portion of the service line. And so the question here is, how are we going to do it? So we had planned on doing $5 million worth of water main work over the next 2 years, and funding this through an IEPA low-interest loan, of course. To fund the private portion, Derek ran the numbers, and there's a specific amount of lead service replacement, lead service lines that would need to be replaced. And of that amount, it's a $1.4 million cost to replace those lead service lines on the private portion. So the question is how are we going to pay for it? After running the numbers, we're going to need at least $720,000 a year for that, which breaks down into a water rate increase of $1.66 per 1,000 gallons. So this is our this is our current water rate, I believe. No, this is our revised water rate. It would be $15.78 per 1,000 gallons, which would be the current water rate of $13.84, plus the increase that we just talked about at $1.66 per 1,000 gallons to finance the private portion of the water service lines for this $5 million worth of work that we're going to do. And then we have to also include in there the increase. We were just notified last week or the week before that the Brookfield North Riverside Water Commission will be increasing the cost of the water by another 28 cents per 1,000 gallons. So if we include that and the $1.66, then our new rate is going to be $15.78 per 1,000 gallons. Ultimately, if you go to the next page, you'll see where how it breaks down from our current rate to our proposed rate and the dollar change per component. So it's $1.94 per 1,000 increase, which is about a 14% increase in the rate. So let's go back to our comparison here. The rates haven't really changed much among the local municipalities that we compared to back in September. Lyons actually went down 50 cents. I'm not sure why. Westchester went up. They were at $11.60. They're now at $11.65. LaGrange stayed the same. North Riverside stayed the same. And Riverside stayed the same. And Western Springs stayed the same. And LaGrange Park stayed the same. So there were no major changes between the September rate that we analyzed and what we're proposing tonight.
Doug, if I could stop you there, how many of these people on this list are Brookfield North Riverside Water Commission?
That would be North Riverside, Brookfield, and LaGrange Park.
The ones in blue.
The ones in blue.
Okay, so they're going to face the same, did they get the same 28-cent increase that we
Yes.
get? Okay.
And before we show you the next bad news slide, I do want to stress that I'm anticipating that, again, these numbers are going to change because if other towns are going through the same thing that we're going through, there's no magic bullet here. You've got to pay for these things through water rates. So I'm guessing that, and again, before we show you the next slide, that these other communities are going to change as well, and that's just a fact of life.
Well, the LaGrange Park, right, is undecided. North Riverside's undecided if they're going to take it on. But was it LaGrange? No, LaGrange has already decided, even though they're not in the same commission, they've already decided to lay that on the property owner, right? So
LaGrange, let's see. Yeah. Yes, correct. Which means then that if the property owner does not want to do it, they can't apply for the grants because the entire line will not be replaced. So you're right. Very good memory. So, back to you, Doug.
So here is the new comparison of the communities with our proposed rate, and that does push us to the most expensive in the area that we looked at. It's a 14.2% increase. We have surpassed LaGrange Park to jump in the lead of the highest priced per 1,000 gallons of water.
And again, that's assuming that these towns that are still considering this don't change their water rate, which I just don't, it won't happen. I mean, they have to do the same thing we do.
This last slide here, this basically, Derek had talked about the potential for grant opportunities. And this is looking ahead 4 years when we're actually looking at the full $37 million that we have to somehow finance. The possible proposed rate, giving the total dollar value of $37 million, would jump up to $17.91 if we receive $4 million in grants. And now these are today's prices, of course. There's going to be inflation and stuff like that going on. But at a point in time of today's, then the proposed rate for $10 million in grants would be 17.22 per 1,000 gallons, and then 1607. As of today, so I went back and I looked, and every $1 million we get in grant funding is going to reduce the increase in the rate by 11 cents per 1,000 gallons, basically. So that's kind of what we're looking at is every year, if we go ahead with these adjustments in rates, we will review the water rate accordingly every year to compare what we may have gotten in grant revenue and adjust those rates accordingly. These are like the maximum rates that we receive under these grant amounts. If we receive no grant amount, the dollar value would be, excuse me while I try and find, dollars would be $18.73 per 1,000 gallons, and that would be the way that we would fund the $37 million replacement project over the next 20 years. So the numbers aren't good. I mean, it is what it is. As Tim and Derek have both said, this is what essentially is an unfunded state mandate at this time. We have to go out and aggressively seek loans, forgiving loans, and it all depends, too, on how the board would like to see us go forward. This last slide here.
I'll take this because I kind of made you put this in. We understand this is not, and I'm not doing this to be funny. We understand and are sensitive to what Trustee Cote said, that yes, these rate increases are hard to swallow. But I think in this country in general, I think it is widely considered that water is still municipal water is still very aggressively priced, meaning it's a pretty good bargain. So we kind of tossed about what is the equivalent to if we bought bottled water for everybody. So for 1,000 gallons of bottled water, our rate of $15.78 per thousand compares to bottled water rate of $1,069. And so what does that say? Even at a very aggressive water rate adjustment, it's still a heck of a lot cheaper than buying bottled water at is this Costco or is this Walmart? Is that
Jessica put it together. It's probably Jewel.
Okay. So just to start the discussion, staff comes to the board knowing this is a really tough issue. It's a really not a popular issue. It's not a popular issue for us. I know it's not a popular issue for the board. We really wrestled with how to do this, how to roll this program. Is my mic on? Oh. We really struggle with how to do this equitably. And the only way that we came up with to make sure that, as Derek and Doug have said, that we keep this thing equitable and fair is that we bite the bullet and say that the village will be responsible for the replacement of the entire lead line. And therefore, by doing that, we commit to applying every year that we can, every year that's out, that there's money in the IEPA program, we try to get that $4 million per year. And future rate adjustments, we come to the board yearly with an annual report about, yeah, we got the grant, no, we didn't. Hopefully we come back and say, yes, we did. This is the rate we would need then. And we would have that discussion every year. Knowing that that is an expensive option, it kind of runs contrary to a lot of the principles that municipal officials hold that, private property improvements are a private property concern. You're building a house, that's a private property issue. We don't pay for improvements on private property. In my career as a village manager, this would be, if we did this, as far as I can think about, would be the first time that a municipality funded 100% of a private property improvement. But in this case, we haven't been able to come up with a really good way to try to take advantage of outside money and treat our residents fairly. We're wide open.
Well-
We're open for ideas.
The whole point well, not the whole point, but one of the main reasons to have commissions, boards, and all this other stuff is do what's best for the residents. Do what's in the residents' best interest. It stinks, honestly, this whole thing, it stinks, but it also stinks that we have lead everywhere, right? And that's just as bad. And if we're talking about, we're having a regulation now, a mandate, that if we replace up to the B box, as opposed to the beat box, that's what we do on the other day. But if we replace up to the B box, and then we tell the resident, oh yeah, you know what, we had a break over here. We need to get you to do a waiver or cough up $4,000 so we can replace it to your house. You know, there's some people that are economically in a state to absorb that and handle that and look forward to that point when they could do that. But we have a lot of people. We just had a grant commission, you know, at the beginning of this meeting, or the board meeting, we were talking about people who can't afford to put their kids in after-school camps, et cetera, and then we're gonna grant that. I can't come up to a resident and just say, you know, drop $4,000, $4,500 to do this. If we can come up with the ability to pay for it, it stinks to raise the water rate to go to that point, but all in all, if we're talking about the general consensus of the good of the community, as we learned in other, lead is bad, we learned that in Michigan, we learned that in all these different ways. If we can get rid of the lead and pay for it as a group project, that would be easier, not easier, it's easier to swallow. Pardon the pun, it's not meant to be a pun, just it's easier to swallow that than it is to tell somebody on a fixed income, well, you're just gonna stick with your lead because you can't afford it, when we could possibly come up with a way to go around that and help pay for that for all the residents, because as you say, there's not an equitable way. Great for those who are already able to do it, great for those who can economically afford and absorb that, but the reality is that we have a lot of people, as we learned earlier, that are below the poverty line, that are having all these other issues. They can't, they're a car breakdown away from disaster as it is. People live paycheck to paycheck, and then if you just drop that on there, and then you have the stress of it all and the anxiety of it all on top of that, we just can't drop that on residents. I am full in favor of us doing what we need to do to be able to afford and pay for this as much as we can as a community, as opposed to telling everybody they're on their own. Because the reality is that some people can't even afford to pay their power bills, much less clean water. Clean water is just a requirement to live. It's necessary in every community, and if we can afford to do that, if we can come up with a way to do that for the residents, that's the whole point of it. That I could not consciously walk away from this and say, well, you're on your own. I just can't do that because we have the ability to do something about that.
Doug, when inevitably it's going to happen, the residents are going to come to us and they're going to show us their property tax bill and say, you know what, here's my $8,000 property tax bill I paid at the Village of Brookfield. The village should pay for this. Do we have $37 million to pay for this?
No, we actually really don't. Probably, we got $1 million or something.
Okay.
And that's not going to get us very far.
And we've done that before where we've put out with the property. And I don't think residents are being contentious necessarily when they do it. They just might understand. I mean, they say their property tax bill is this, and we've done that breakdown before where we show how much of their property tax bill actually comes to the Village of Brookfield. But I mean, this is as Trustee Cote pointed out, I mean, we started this by saying it's an unfunded mandate, and it is, but it's a public safety issue and requirement. I don't think anyone on the board disagrees. We need to replace lead water services. It's a health concern. It should be removed. It's just in terms of, you know, how we fund it and tying it to the water rate, which is what we're doing, is we're delivering water through the system, is what we need to do. So I think the plan as presented by staff is kind of the lesser of all the evils to do it going forward. People are going to say, well, I'm having trouble paying my water bill as it is, but I mean, we have to, Trustee Cote pointed out, this is our job. We have to find a way to replace this system that was put in place when everybody bought their homes in Brookfield or built their homes in Brookfield, if they're the original homes, they knew there was lead service lines in there and going forward. So I asked you the question, and it was somewhat facetious because I know we don't have $37 million laying around. And as people have approached me over the past years saying, the alleys are the other really big topic of, well, why don't we get these alleys paved? Everyone else has their alleys paved. We know there's at least a price tag of $40 million out there, and we haven't been focusing or directing funds that way for a reason, because I think most of the board would agree with me that while it would be nice to have more alleys paved, lead water service replacement is a more important expenditure of village funds at this point. If we're going to have to increase and pay for something, having the nice paved alley done by everybody with lead service lines doesn't make sense. So I think this is we have to direct the limited resources we have and the limited revenue sources we have towards the projects that mean the most for public health. And these things are tough because no one knows, you can't see your water service. It's buried underground. So we're paying this money, you're paying for an increase and you don't see it. But I think most of the residents, I know all the residents, if they think about it, are smart enough to know that, safe water going forward is something very important and something that we have to do. And as we increase water rates, if the board votes to do this, we all pay water bills. We're all voting to increase our own water bills, and we understand that going forward. And not to add a further damper to the potential or prospects here, we talked about it that the biggest areas, we're one of the higher density, water main services. The other mention was the city of Chicago. I'm really afraid what Mayor Lightfoot's solution is going to be for the city of Chicago to pay for their lead service replacement. But I can only imagine that it probably includes a cost of the water increase that they sell to the Brookfield North Riverside Water Commission.
Yeah, but you're absolutely, that's a very valid, I remember about 15 years ago, the city of Chicago went years without raising its water rate to suburban communities. All of a sudden, and I'm sure they did it to every suburb, they raised the rates like 20% over a period of 2 or 3 years. It was 20% per year.
Right.
They now have a policy in place that I believe ties future increases to the CPI. I think it's capped at 5%. So they have a ordinance. Now, they can change that ordinance.
Wow.
But
we're familiar with, because that increase happened here, and we lobbied Springfield to try and put some limitation, the West Central Municipal Council, but I venture to say that we're in better position to deal with this than the city of Chicago, and it seems like their remedy for everything is to have everyone else subsidize their improvements. So, and we don't, it's not like we have the alternative to get water from somewhere else. So I'm just putting that warning out. I hope I'm wrong, but we're talking about, and we anticipate annual increases from the Brookfield North Riverside Water Commission. There's inflation and the cost of delivering water and everything goes up, but if we also get tacked on, if our residents, through our water rate, have to finance the lead service replacement in the city of Chicago, it's going to be even more difficult. So I don't mean to be the gloom and doom guy, but I think we have to be aware of that possibility going forward. And if there's any attempt to amend that legislation or policy, we have to fight it as a commission and as a group. So
even with the water rate adjustment, the premise is still that we're able to get the low interest loans, right? And isn't everybody going to be applying for those?
Yes, so what we're looking at, so our, one of the priorities we have so we have from now until 2027 to start our proactive replacement program on lead water services, starting in 2027. I think the plan is we'll apply for the $4 million in grant funding for lead water service replacement. If we get it, we'll go out and do that. And we'll probably do it at that amount that if we receive $4 million, we'll do $4 million worth of replacement. And it brings down that $37 million cost overall. But the other issue we have is we just last year passed a water rate increase so we could start replacing some of the 31 miles of 100-year-old mains. And the discussion has always been and remains that we will apply this year for replacing those water mains. That's $5 million. Staff has kicked out around a couple numbers. We were looking at a larger number, but I think we're going to split it up and do $5 million and apply for that this year. it's about 15 blocks of water main and equated to, I had the number, but it was about 700, no, it was actually 1.4 million, the number Doug projected it on the screen. And we figured we have 2 years to raise that money. That's why we said $700,000 a year. If we don't get any grant funding for lead service replacement, we would want to use that money that the increase in the water rate generated to help us replace the lead water services associated with the 15 blocks of water main.
But to trustee Ketchmark's point, though, if you're a community that's putting the responsibility on the property owner, they're not applying, they can't apply for that grant fund.
No, my point is that every municipality here is in the same predicament. And if we're relying on grant funding, if we're relying on low-interest loans, at some point that's probably gonna run out, right? Because everybody.
Right, but if more communities, first of all, they don't, the degree of a problem that these communities aren't Brookfield. So Oak Park, LaGrange, and Lombard, for instance, we're not competing with them.
Sure.
So if more communities fall in that category, we'll have a better chance of getting the funding, because we are unfortunately more heavily into the lead than other communities are.
But are the ones that did get grant funding though, did any of them get the max?
They did.
Even Chicago was capped at 4 million, which is
But they were
very-
getting the max. They weren't getting like you get $1 million here. And you guys can-
Some got less than the max, but remember, some of them may not have applied.
They might not have
for
needed
enough
the max.
Services to keep the amount to, Trustee Ketchmark, I think I get your point now, is what we're suggesting, we could hold off on the water rate increase until 2027, and then just do it all then, okay? Problem is, we have this large water main project coming up in next year from 23-24, and we're gonna encounter a lot of lead water service replacement. Even though we don't need to start our program to 27, we're gonna have it associated with the water main replacement. So the funding that the water rate increase that we're suggesting is to fund the private portion of those water services associated with that capital water main replacement. It's about 15 blocks. What happens if we get the $4 million grant? Okay, now we can use the funding from the water rate increase to do the services associated with the water main project, and we can go out and do $4 million of lead water service replacement elsewhere. We're assuming we're not gonna get a full $37 million worth of grant funding. We may. And it's hard to discuss how much will be available, because some of these communities have significantly less funding. If they're able to continue providing a similar level of funding over 20 years, you'd think towards the end that everyone else has their water services replaced and aren't applying, so we can start receiving larger and larger shares. But it's hard to tell, because we can't even guarantee that the total, that 108 million over 3 years, we can't guarantee that that type of funding will continue to be available. Tough subject for the board. If I could add one thing, so Carl, Tim, Doug, and I, we had a long meeting and went back and forth on this, and ultimately what it came down to is, at the end, we felt we're fairly certain we can get a significant amount of grant money. I don't know how we define that. Is 4 million significant? Seems fairly significant. Maybe we can get more than that. This is over 20 years. We just don't know how to distribute that type of money to the residents to lessen their total burden, unless we're gonna go ahead and the village says, you know what, we're gonna just make that private portion of the lead service replacement ours. Now we can go ahead and distribute that money. And we discussed a lot of our alternatives we're not necessarily presenting now, but one of them is, what if we get the 4 million, we just bank it and we distribute it to just people that wanna do their private portion of the lead. Problem is the EPA, you have to spend that within 12 to 18 months. So you have to identify which services you're gonna replace, and you need to go out, and if you had 5% drop off, could you replace, because the residents said, I don't wanna pay for my portion, if we were gonna make them responsible, that's fine, but I anticipate if we make the residents responsible for paying for the private portion, we're gonna have a significant percentage that just won't have any choice but to, I guess, decline replacing.
A lot of people are gonna have to decline because they just don't have $5,000 readily available at that point.
So I mean, the plan you've recommended seems to be the most equitable way to doing it going forward, but it also seems to, increase our chances of getting the grant because, there's not the people opting out that's gonna affect, our grant requirement. Also, the hope is that maybe some of these towns will, be reluctant to do this or go forward. We're ahead of schedule as always. We're doing this earlier. I mean, it's 26, 27 before we actually have to have the plan. Some towns may wait and put it off till 2027 if we can get more of the funding that's available now ahead of time and get ahead of it, I'm sure there'll be some towns that will push the deadline and maybe ask for an extension of the deadline to come up with a plan because they can't deal with it. They don't want to deal with it. It's politically, not convenient to deal with it, delay it for future boards, put it off, that type of thing. So this is one of the tough parts of the job. I think we have to be ready to move forward with this, try and put our residents and our, bank account in the best position by moving forward with this as quickly as we can to take advantage of as much grant money as available. And then we have to continue to lobby, the state to include this money going forward every year through the Illinois IPA. And hopefully, the federal government will, pass on more to the state government because this is also an issue that's been talked about in federal capital bills and stuff that maybe there will be some incentive for the federal government to pass on money to the state, which will fund this going forward because it's a national issue. I mean, we all talk about Michigan, but it's happened in other places. So, this is a difficult thing for us to do, but I think it's the most sensible and equitable thing to do is for the village to say, we're going to take responsibility for the entire replacement of all the lead service, and we'll have to fund it through, grants and the water rate increase as necessary going forward over the years. And future boards will have to either stick with it, or if someone comes forward with some other great idea that we're missing, we'll open it, open our minds to it, or future boards that get elected, they could say, okay, we have a better way of doing this, so. Any other questions or comments from the board?
I agree with all of this. I agree with us paying for it. Ed said all of the things that I was going to say, so I'm not going to say them all again. Thanks, Ed. And, I appreciate everyone's work on this and thoughtfulness to be proactive about it, so thank you.
Same, I agree. We just need to keep aggressively hunting down new funding sources to try and offset what we can.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, when we're done with this, and the end of decades, when we're done with this, there'll be a completely safe water main service for decades to come in the village of Brookfield because of the steps that we're taking now. And this isn't the glamorous part of the job here. This isn't building a beautiful park or recreation center or even paving everybody's alleys, but this is probably the thing that will impact our residents' safety the most.
It's a difficult decision, but to put it off would be irresponsible of us.
Right.
Absolutely.
I agree. Okay.
I don't want to sound trite and I don't want to sound pandering, but I'm proud of that decision by the board because I think you're absolutely right. That's what we got to do. You guys get paid the big bucks to make those kind of decisions, and I think it's really the only way to do it.
All right, well, thank you I know this has been a lot of work and thought and ideas and brainstorming for everyone, and we'll monitor as it goes forward, but we have to continue to, as Trustee Anderson pointed, look out for every grant opportunity. We have to lobby our state and federal officials for more funding for this, but we have to plan for the worst, including possible rate increases from the city of Chicago. I mean, I don't think Mayor Lightfoot is watching our meeting tonight, and I don't think I'd be putting the idea in her head, but I'm sure that's somewhere on a whiteboard somewhere that the suburbs and the North Riverside Water Commission could help fund the city of Chicago's problems. So let's hope that's not the case. All right, the next item up for discussion, Doug, thank you, and Derek, thank you. Discussion of hybrid versus gasoline-only vehicles for fleet replacement. Chief?
Good evening, Board. Try to keep this concise. I know, had these discussions regarding a collective effort towards moving towards a more eco-friendly and green vehicle fleet across departments for the village. I'm sure everyone's aware there are lots of constraints, private and public sector, when it comes to acquiring these vehicles. So we're just looking for a little bit more, hopefully just direction as far as being sensitive to the emphasis and focus of the board when it comes to what's available out there. In my memo, I detailed how of the 2 vehicles that were slated or are slated to be replaced this year, our parking enforcement vehicle unfortunately has gotten to this point where the repairs outweigh the value of the vehicle. So we're now at a position where, and unfortunately, I don't have any vehicles even that we can acquire right now, but you know, Tim and I and actually other directors have been discussing just as far as when vehicles become available, whether we, you know, the emphasis should be towards gasoline when we can, if we can get that faster, or the hybrid vehicles, which, you know, there's more of course, a long-term benefit towards. So wanted to seek your thoughts on that.
And, you know, the advantages and disadvantages, as you listed here, are very helpful. You know, and this board has been very vocal in its support, and we, you know, agreed to actively participate in the 2021 Climate Action Plan. And, you know, there has been a strong desire from the board to not just pay lip service to the plan, to try and move forward. So I appreciate you bringing it forward in that context. We've talked in general about possibly moving towards electric vehicles in departments going forward. And obviously there's, you know, different needs in different departments, but as Chief laid out here, and the advantages and disadvantages of and part of it is the timing, and as Chief pointed out very well, the availability of the vehicles at this point in time. So, you know, it talks about, you know, fuel savings of at least $2,000 a year with rising gas prices, you know, with going with the hybrid vehicle. But the additional cost to purchase is anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 going forward. And the delayed availability is another major issue here, with, you know, indicating that if we ordered it, you know, fall, it would be available in 12 to 18 months. So, but, you know, and the other, you know, I'm not going to read that, you know, I know the board's familiar with the chart, so I'm just kind of opening it up for discussions, comments. Obviously, Chief is looking for direction on where do we want to go at this point in time with direction for the vehicles needed for the police department.
President Garvey, just to touch off what you said, and I appreciate you summarizing, assisting me with the summary, and maybe just to illustrate the specific issue right now with that Ford Escape gasoline versus hybrid. The window to order those vehicles have ended for this model year, and I think Enterprise, as well as, you know, all the manufacturers, are just it's uncertain if and then when the new ordering will be open again. I'm certain that, you know, many of these manufacturers are working towards having more options for us, but unfortunately that's another component that's just an unknown as far as when we'll have. His words were if and then when the open, you know, but I'm operating under the premise that we will have another opportunity for the next model year for hybrids. Obviously, we all know what's going on with gas prices and whatnot, so I can't imagine they're going to stop creating those. The only other thing that I didn't have in the memo was just the aspect of what makes and models are available. There's right now a fairly limited optionality for American brands versus some of your other, you know, Honda, Toyota, and whatnot.
And one of the points you pointed out, and I think you were trying to be diplomatic and delicate, you talked about that hybrids typically have slower acceleration ability. And obviously we don't encourage and desire high-speed chases or anything like this, but I mean, how significant of a disadvantage is that with police vehicles?
As you stated, you know, we've certainly seen a shift in the way that we conduct ourselves in police-related matters. It is few and far between in which we're engaging in anything, you know, where we need that immediate acceleration. But it certainly is still a part of what we do. I mean, that there are instances where we need to, you know, respond to an emergency quickly. It doesn't have to be involved with anything to do with like a chase. It could just simply be, you know, a violent domestic or something to that effect. So I don't know that I'd ever advocate for anything that's, you know.
And like I said, I think you're just trying to lay out the options. And are you familiar with any neighboring towns that have experience using hybrids as patrols or the type of vehicles that we're using and feedback?
So we're all, again, I think it is a great thing that we are kind of at, you know, we're trying to be at the forefront, at least in this area. One of our neighboring communities, I communicated briefly with Riverside, and they're using the Ford Explorer hybrid. And unfortunately, they've been actually, you know, encountering quite a few issues. I think it's just because it's still a very new transition with respect to what those vehicles were. You know, they're expected to run 24/7. So that was one of the comments, or at least in the discussions I had. And then I was also told another north suburb is experiencing, you know,
like what I mean, can you give like performance issues, availability issues, or what's
more in respects to requiring unforeseen maintenance and repair type of things.
Okay. All right, questions, comments from the board?
Well, I appreciate the proactivity of looking into this in relation to the climate action plan, especially on the heels of our alternative fuel car show this weekend. It was exciting to see this on the agenda, so thank you. But I also think that, you know, making switch outs when appropriate, you know, if there's not the right type of car available for a high speed or acceleration that you need, then you wait until a later time when that's available. But like you know, a car, the enforcement officer, or like that's going around doing tickets, like that's an appropriate car probably for a hybrid or alternative fuel. And I think as we continue to look in other areas of our fleet, in public works and water, you know, that there's vehicles that are available right now or in the near future that might be more appropriate for that type of replacement, and some that may not be. But I think as long as we're being proactive and thinking about it and looking at the pros and cons and keeping on it, as well as, you know, incentives or rebates or grants to help with that. And if, you know, we don't have any place to plug those vehicles in yet here. So looking at the infrastructure that we need for plug-ins in the future, if we're going to move in that direction, it's kind of a bigger issue, but I appreciate looking into it now and also being honest with what some of the disadvantages are.
So what is the acceleration? How significant is that?
Well, actually, to Trustee Kaluzny's point, that's actually kind of why we wanted to start with
Just the parking enforcement?
Yeah, non-patrol, you know, or general patrol vehicles, and the other vehicle was going to be used, you know, towards like non-uniformed like investigations and whatnot. So that was kind of our intent to see how they perform in the field. As far as, I'm not a car guy, so I don't know the specifics on you know, the 0 to 60 or something.
Yeah, I mean, like a fully electronic vehicle has, their takeoff is unreal. It'll blow everybody else off the road.
Yeah.
Just off the zero. But then you have to keep it running all the time, because then you have computer systems that have to stay online all the time, and so you can't just shut it off. So I don't know what the wear and tear is, or the ability of having a fully electronic vehicle. But the hybrid, and Trustee Kaluzny brings up a great point, and she, you know, our not just parking enforcement is something that we could have looked at or could look at for, you know, a permit and DPW, you know, community development, in our permit enforcement, or for lack of better term, enforcement. But those other areas, and then that leads me into, are those options in the lease program that we were just discussing? We had a lease I'm looking at right at Doug.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. My glasses might deflect it back down to Chief there, but we were just talking about, right there, we were just talking about, recently about doing leases, a lease changeout,
I
right?
believe that vehicle was included in the list.
Yes, and that was, yeah, just echoing Doug so that it's on record, yeah.
That's really why we're having this. That's really why we're having this discussion, is that
Right.
everything we're giving to you, Enterprise can do. It's really, we've as a staff said, well, board, are we willing to take a chance on performance and higher pricing and perhaps longer availability to get a more environmentally friendly vehicle, or should we prioritize availability, price, and known performance? It's really, we're kind of at, no pun intended, but a fork in the road as to what do we want to do. I agree with what Trustee Kaluzny said, where to me, it makes sense for a parking enforcement vehicle, for a CSO, whatever, that I think we should go the hybrid route and spend a little bit more money and perhaps experiment with that. But maybe it's not the time to be taking a chance for a squad car where we don't do a lot of high-speed chases, but those vehicles are hard miles that they're driven. And right now in this country, in our economy, the fact remains these internal combustion gasoline engines are pretty well known and pretty established as reliable.
So is the ask right now, I mean, to purchase one gasoline, the one gas Ford Escape, now immediately, which we can acquire right now. But what about the second purchase? I mean, the hybrid, I mean, with that delay, I mean, is the delay of availability going to cost us, additional because it's not going to be available, and, the maintenance and not having another vehicle? I mean, what exactly is your request right now or your recommendation right now?
So, my specific request right now is for, support towards purchasing one of the two vehicles as gasoline. And then the second one, I want to continue to, pursue the commitment towards a hybrid for the second vehicle. Now, unfortunately, it's going to end up being that gasoline one will be for the parking enforcement vehicle, because the one that we have is now out of service, and we today just finished outfitting temporarily an old squad car for that utilization. But the other vehicle that I'm slated to replace is not as heavily used, and it is still manageable. So I foresee that we should be able to make that last until.
So if the hybrid doesn't become available till the spring or summer of 2023, it would cover the vehicle you're looking to replace?
I'm sorry, could you repeat?
So if we decide to go with one gasoline-powered vehicle, which would have to be the enforcement vehicle right now, the other vehicle that you have in place could hold on till the spring or summer of 2023, when then that's the first time we try out a hybrid to replace that vehicle?
Yes.
Okay, so it's kind of the compromise. We get the gasoline-powered vehicle we need right now, and then, in spring, summer of 2023, we get the hybrid delivered, ideally delivered to replace the other vehicle, and then that'll be our test vehicle to see how it goes. Is that kind of?
That exactly.
Okay. How does the board feel about that?
I'm in favor.
I agree with staff's recommendation.
And this has nothing to do that I heard on the radio today that the Corvettes are coming out with all-electric Corvettes.
Well, wait a minute.
I heard the same.
You're not going to come back and ask for an electric Corvette in a few years?
No.
I do have a question not on the Corvettes, but, so the other police departments that you had spoken to, and they have hybrids, and maybe they have a hybrid as a cruiser or something to that effect, and doing so, of course, in doing so in police business, sometimes you have to bump cars, you have to block cars, you have to take damage to the car. Is there a higher, who pays for that damage, one? Is that covered by our insurance, all in all, or is it a higher rate because of that? If you were to go with a police cruiser, that would just be something I would want to know, I would like to know. when you do speak to them that, you know, when you have cases where they had to bump or they had to blockade or they had to take damage on, you know, is it a higher cost to repair, turnaround, and what is that kind of financial impact?
It might be, I mean, but I think if somebody else hit one of our hybrid vehicles,
No,
we do what we always.
No, during incidents, sometimes you have to use your car to block.
Right.
So
no,
it takes damage in that
And if a
case.
bad guy hits our car, we would do what we do now, and our our insurance agent would go after the offending vehicle's insurance, and they'd have to pay whatever. There may be some rate adjustments in the industry because hybrids might,
I just was wondering about,
they're
you
more
know, because the damage control, I mean, the cost of repairing that damage, and even if we were to push the guy off the side of the road, regardless of whose fault it is, or maybe the person passed out and is driving for whatever reason, you know, and the car is still going, you had to push him off the road. That kind of damage, regardless of that, I just don't know what the financial impact is, if there is a financial impact.
Yeah, I don't think the industry has figured that out yet. It's still kind of new. I mean, maybe someday the insurance rates will adjust accordingly, kind of like after a hurricane hits and property insurance goes up eventually. I think this is kind of the same issue, but I've not heard or seen any evidence that this has happened yet in the auto insurance business.
But I think there's a clear consensus from the board that we can go ahead with the recommendations of chief, so. And I truly appreciate you being conscious of our desire to follow through on our climate action plan commitment and bringing this forward, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Can
I'm
I
sorry.
just add one more thing?
Sure, absolutely.
The Conservation Commission is also continuing to work on that sustainability plan, and there is a section about transportation and fleet, so hopefully if that comes before the board eventually as a plan to adopt, it would help provide some more direction to these types of conversations in the future. But I promise it's forthcoming.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. The last item, a discussion to utilize bids obtained by the Suburban Purchasing Cooperative from the 2021 pavement striping program for the 2022 pavement striping program. Derek, you taking?
I will. Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. Really what we're coming here to receive approval for is ultimately a way to obtain bids for our annual pavement striping program. The Northwest Municipal Conference has a Suburban Purchasing Cooperative. What they do is they go out and they obtain bids from pavement striping contractors, and other municipalities are allowed to take advantage of those bids. They obviously have a much larger quantity of work, so there's a big economy of scale that can be realized by using them. There's also some savings in that you're not paying us to put the bidding documents together, you're not paying the newspaper to advertise for bids. What we did as a comparison is the last time we went out for bids on a Village of Brookfield project, we used those quantities versus the 2019 unit prices, and we compared them to what the 2022 unit prices were through the Suburban Purchasing Cooperative, and it resulted in a 40% savings if we use their bid prices versus what we've got 3 years ago. So we're just looking for direction from the board for us to go ahead and utilize the Suburban Purchasing Cooperative prices. It is a large contractor, Superior Road Striping. They're out of Melrose Park, done work in town. They did the project last year. We actually used this Suburban Purchasing Cooperative last year and felt it was very successful.
This is once again one of the true benefits of belonging to and being active in the WCMC meetings and conference. This is like a key member benefit by getting the joint purchasing prices and things. So I try to remind myself of that every time I have to go to a WCMC meeting, that there is a benefit to it. But this is literally a kind of a no-brainer decision. Do we want to get the better group price by going with the questions or comments from the board?
Makes sense.
Yes.
All right, save the easiest one for last.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Derek, thank you for bringing it forward. That ends the items that we have up for discussion at this point. I'll open up to public comment. Is there anyone on the right side? Anybody on the left side? Hearing no public comment, is there any need for executive session? Hearing no need for executive session, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn at 8:58 PM.
So moved.
Second.
Motion was made by trustee Cote, second by trustee Kaluzny. Roll call, please.
Trustee Ketchmark?
Aye.
Aye.
Trustee Cote?
Aye.
Trustee Hendricks?
Aye.
Trustee Leclerc?
Aye.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, the meeting's adjourned.